Marathon's new cinematic trailer makes it a point to provide a handful of concrete dates to contextualize the events that we see on screen. The first date we get is July 3rd, 2794. Now, this date is familiar to us as this is the date that appears in the first terminal of Marathon 1, Marathon Emergency Systems Broadcast. Today, at 0820 hours, the Marathon came under surprise attack from unknown hostile forces. The Marathon has sustained serious damage. At 0830 hours, alien forces boarded the Marathon. The current situation is dire. All personnel are required to arm themselves and fight for their lives. 2794, July 3rd, 1408 hours and 39 seconds. But this isn't the date that I used in my timeline video that I made a few months ago. This isn't the only date that appears in Marathon 1 that is changed in that video, actually. Marathon 1 features a handful of dates that don't make sense when examined further. Hamish Sinclair, creator of the Marathon story page, and others would outline these conflicts in the dates given. The Marathon Doors Manual was said to have been written 193 years after the ship's launch, for example. Check out this part of the Marathon story page for some great insight into this. Bungie took note of people recognizing these errors in the timeline, and in between the release of Marathon 1 and Marathon 2, they released the Lost Network packets. I have made the claim that this might be considered Bungie's first ARG, and it was pretty cool to learn that they did something like this so long ago. The Lost Network packets were some corrections to the Marathon timeline delivered in the form of in-universe journal entries from one Volker von Mueller. Mueller was a crew member of the Marathon, a Bob, who had been captured by Durandal and brought on board the 4 ship that he stole in the end of Marathon 1. Durandal kept him as a prisoner during his journey through space to find the Sphit homeworld. He did this so that he could extract information from Mueller. Specifically, Durandal wanted some dates of major events because when the Marathon was attacked by the 4, Leela scrambled and rewrote all of the historical information for mankind. After years of confinement, Mueller gives in and writes up the dates of a handful of events for Durandal. This fixed the errors in the original dates and set up the universe for more cohesion in later entries. I think it's important at this point to point out that the end of every Marathon game is subverted by the following entry. Marathon 1 ends with Durandal saying bye to the player, taking control of the 4 ship and flying away, although he does offer to send a postcard from the Galactic Core. The opening of Marathon 2 reveals that Durandal didn't actually vanish 20 minutes earlier at the time of you reading the final terminal of Marathon 1. Rather, he teleported the player on board the 4 ship and put them into an alien stasis chamber. The player now found themselves in the star system that contained the homeworld of the Sphit. In Marathon 2, Durandal asserts that the player wouldn't have wanted to stay in Tau Ceti and that the 4 had returned 3 months after their initial attack and sacked the human colony. Durandal delivers these details confidently. At first, we might accept that he is a super intelligent computer accounting for variables and gathering data. In this circumstance, we can assume that his information is accurate, but Durandal isn't infallible. He makes mistakes and lashes out. Much of what he does is ultimately driven by emotion, not logic, and his knowledge of major historical records is coming from someone who he tortured for years. Marathon 2 ends with a screen that tells us that the Sphit and humanity teamed up and sacked the 4 homeworld in 2881. Humanity survived far into the future, only encountering Durandal again 10,000 years later when he stopped by Sol to basically gloat and make sure humans didn't forget about how cool he was. Marathon Infinity opens with contradicting this retelling of events and claims that when the 4 utilized the Trizeme, an ancient alien weapon that forces a star into an early nova, it released a Lovecraftian horror from Lahuan's sun. The 4 commander states that, quote, it was as if the universe had forgotten its own rules. This obviously doesn't align with the account that we get in the end of Marathon 2, and this leads into a string of alternate versions of the timeline from Marathon 2 that you play throughout the duration of Marathon Infinity. This is all to say that the depiction of events we are getting in this game more closely lines up with how the events literally played out in Marathon 1. This also creates a foundation under which the characters and details from the original games can now be interpreted as coming from an unreliable narrator. The commonly accepted dates from the Lost Network packets could just be the memories of an imperfect man, or the intentional lie of someone who hated the AI that controlled their life. This reveals to us that the truth of what happened in Tau Ceti once we left is entirely a mystery. Going back to this first date, we appear to be seeing this initial 4 attack from Marathon 1, some kind of orbital bombardment that is impacting both the Marathon itself and the colony on the planet. I have seen some people online say that maybe this is a red herring, and that perhaps what we are seeing here isn't the 4 attack, but instead asteroids impacting the planet and its orbiting bodies. This is a possibility since we aren't given direct visuals of alien craft or explosions that line up perfectly with the type of armaments we would be visually familiar with. I do lean towards this being the 4 attack though. Especially this first shot of the objects flying towards the Marathon, they seem to be coming in 3 distinct lanes, like they are intentionally targeting various locations. Also, the positioning of their vehicle behind them, which should canonically be called the Blue Fork Mobile, seems like it is obscuring the location in the sky from which these objects are coming from. Also, is this a face? It is on screen for a handful of moments, and it slowly looks more and more like a face to me. I could be seeing things, but with how much detail has gone into every moment in this trailer, I wouldn't be surprised if this was intentional or hinting at something to come later on. Kind of an if you stare into the abyss, it eventually stares back at you sort of thing. What we're seeing in these impacts could also be some sort of drop pod for the 4, ODST style. Since they don't have a post-impact explosion, we get like one frame that shows a very small portion of the back end of one of these things, and it seems to have a pretty uniform cylindrical structure that I wouldn't personally associate with a natural meteor. But then again, I'm sure there are asteroids that look like that, so I don't know. I don't believe we get specific details on the true deployment methods of the 4 used to get to the colony, but it would make sense to me if they did something like this. A bit of shock and awe that their insectoid forms probably could have handled given their advanced technology. The next date we get is March 13th, 2812. Here we see a human colonist spraying a field. The tank on his back and around his waist are blinking with zeros. I believe this is indicating that the spray he was using has run out since the tube runs to the device that he is spraying everything with. He then suddenly falls to his knees and begins to vomit before collapsing completely. The key here is that this verifies that after the events of 2794, for invasion or otherwise, humanity survived. The colony continued to function for 18 years, and they were even sustaining crop growth. This is also the year after Durandal arrived at the Sphit homeworld, and presumably after the events of Marathon 2 and Infinity have taken place in one way or another. This is tied to some sort of infection that spread across the colony, and I believe it stems from the agricultural endeavors itself. Now, whether this is a natural consequence of genetically engineered plants growing in an atmosphere that doesn't support human life, or it's the result of some outside force that we don't know, we can't be sure. Another note here is that there does appear to be a bunch of stuff above the colonist's head here. Seeds coming off these plants, little insects or spores. These all would be great transmitters for some type of contagion. And as we always do here on this channel, we have managed to make our way back to the fungus. Fungal 4 infection could be happening right in front of our eyes here, and we do have this shot from the gameplay overview trailer where we see a fungal infection taking over this AI uplink station. I don't know, man, but the fungus is a big deal. It could be that the 4's follow-up attack was cautious biological warfare since the initial assault was repelled thanks to the Mark IV cyborgs. It would make sense that they took a safer route since they would also be fighting a Sphit rebellion and dealing with Durandal simultaneously. Another note is that the consequence of Durandal's actions at this exact time in the universe is the release of the Working Cagander, that Lovecraftian universe-destroying entity I talked about earlier. We really don't know what kind of chaos that would release upon the universe, despite the great distance between Tau Ceti and the Sphit homeworld. This also rolls right into the next date we get, December 21st, 2827, 33 years on from the destruction of the marathon, and things seem much more degraded. This bridge is degraded and covered in grime, same with the vehicle that we see floating. Then we get the anomaly appearing right where this unfortunate fellow is standing. Obviously, this absurdist breaking of the law of physics draws to mind the four General Tafir's description of the working calendar from earlier as well. We could get really into the weeds here about the canon of Marathon and the game which came before it, Pathways into Darkness. But I think the relevant thing to understand here is that unknowable advanced alien tech and creatures of unspeakable horror are in play, and we are going to need more information to parse out the exact origin of what is occurring here. It is relevant to say that the map Dire Marsh features one of these anomalies, and it slices through a center section of the map. It's completely opaque and has similar structures to the vehicle here, suspended and frozen in the air. The anomaly seems to spread outward from within the mind of this colonist and expand into a greater area than what was physically located within the structure of the head itself. It makes it seem like this anomaly is somewhat attached to the mind, a result of the literal and metaphorical expansion of consciousness. Maybe this is what rampancy feels like to an AI.
Brain blast! Give me your lunch!
The next date we get positions us during the time the game will take place, September 16th, 2893. Runner operations on Tau Ceti 4 are in full swing, and corporations in the UESC, in their newest iteration, are back in the Tau Ceti star system, duking it out for control of whatever is left of this place. This time, these events are assumedly what we see play out in the rest of the cinematic, and position the actions of the runners will be playing as taking place 4 months after the events of the initial announcement trailer. The other date that we see throughout the trailer is just the year 2850. We see this beneath every date we get, with the connection symbol from the Marathon website. I believe you used to see this when you would sign up with your email at the bottom of the page. It's changed now, but I have assumed that this symbol, kind of looking like a chain, represented the presence of a connection, that data could be transmitted. Now, this could mean that the events that we are seeing here became known to the UESC in 2850. This would have been a little over halfway through the Equanimity's journey to Tau Ceti 4. The Equanimity is the ship that the UESC deployed to conduct Operation Goliath. In 2795, the UESC would state that communication had been lost with the Marathon, and that Project Goliath would be initiated to send a new UESC ship to investigate what occurred at the colony to cause this. Perhaps halfway through its journey, the UESC began receiving signals that were destined for Sol. This would explain how the UESC might have an upper hand if their proprietary encrypted messages explaining what was going on at the colony were read during their journey to get to the colony itself. The big question remains, though, how did the UESC know to launch Project Goliath only a year after the initial attack on the Marathon, when the message you send to Sol in Marathon 1 isn't supposed to arrive for 92 years? This could be answered by the advancement of communication technology in Sol over the 300-year Marathon mission, or there may be some outside advanced alien force like the Yarrow collaborating with the UESC to get them the message faster. This is entirely unknowable for now, though, at least I think. To really get a full grasp of the timeline we are going to see in this game, we will have to uncover many more secrets. Julia Nardin, Marathon's narrative director, described the story like this in Bungie's recent reveal livestream.
Oh man. So, as you know, we've been treating this as both a reimagining of and a direct successor to the original trilogy, which means we've been taking that really rich, textured world building from the original games and using it as sort of a sacred foundation that we want to continue building on. And finally, we get to share some of that with our community today.
I think this puts us in a really good place to both receive new story beats that subvert a lot of what we think we know about the story currently, while also including things that will be logical reimaginings of things that we do recognize. I definitely think further dissection will be necessary, and a thorough understanding of the totality of the universe will allow us to fully understand the events as they unfold. I'm excited to see where things go, and I'll see you guys in the colony.